Thunder split the midnight over St. Bartholomew's as the lights died and rain battered the stone steps. Michael Reed said, "I can't breathe," and the words fogged the air like a confession. Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Michael, stay with me," as candle stubs woke without a match. Dr. Aaron Cole said, "Power surge, nothing mystical," yet his knuckles whitened on a penlight. Lena Morales said, "Fear talks loud when truth is near," and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. The baptismal font trembled as if remembering storms, and water rang like a struck bell. A shadow uncoiled above the font, and shaped a face that smiled without lips. Michael said, "I know you." And the shadow stretched like smoke that had learned to hate. A woman of light stood behind the altar with eyes like morning. She said, "I am Seraphim," and the shadow shrank as if starved. Grace said, "In whose name do you come?" And the answer felt like dawn in a locked room. Aaron whispered, "We are all hallucinating," though his voice shook. Lena said, "Or finally awake," and the church held its breath. The generator thudded in the church kitchen while steam curled from chipped mugs. Michael Reed said, "I left a patient because I froze, and he died," and stared at the sink as if it could judge. Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Shame keeps score, but mercy keeps time," and slid tea across the table. Dr. Aaron Cole said, "You dissociated, and it can be treated," and set the penlight down like a truce. Lena Morales said, "I used to run when I hurt most, and running taught me nothing," and her voice landed soft. Rain thinned to a silver hiss, and the fluorescent tube flickered back to life. Michael said, "If fear has a shape, maybe it has a diet," and tried a dry smile. Grace said, "We can starve it with truth," and the words felt like bread. Aaron said, "We start with steps, not miracles," but he did not sound certain. Lena said, "Steps become roads," and opened the sugar like a ritual. Michael breathed deeper than the storm would allow. He felt watched by peace that would not force him. He was not ready, yet he had already begun. Hymnals lined Grace's office like quiet witnesses as rain tapped the window. Michael Reed said, "My sister Emily drowned when I was 19, and the name shook loose air he had stored for years." Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Grief can become an altar when fear is the priest," and watched his hands. Dr. Aaron Cole said, "Trauma generalizes, and your body still thinks the lake is here," and pointed to a breathing chart. Lena Morales said, "What if the water is asking for truth, not terror?" and shifted closer. Michael traced a sunlit photo of Lake Maris on the desk, and felt the floor tilt. He said, "I have not touched water since," and the sentence tasted like a dare. Grace said, "Then we will fold the dare into steps," and smiled at the word. Aaron said, "An exposure ladder, measured and safe," and uncapped a pen. Lena said, "I will stand by the rail with you," and meant it. The office smelled of paper, and rain, and second chances. Somewhere the thunder moved on. The room waited for him to agree. Wipers beat a metronome as Aaron's sedan carved rain along the river road. Dr. Aaron Cole said, "Fear is a survival algorithm that won't retire," and checked mirrors like vital signs. Michael Reed said, "Mine feels like a sentence without parole," and watched streetlights smear into veins. Lena Morales said, "Sentences can be commuted," and tightened her seatbelt. Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Truth signs the pardon when we bring the whole case," and held a thermos steady. Sirens moaned 2 blocks over and made the car's shell feel thinner. Aaron said, "We will check the blackout near the pier," and pressed the hazard toggle. Michael said, "I keep hoping logic will talk this down," and shook his head. Lena said, "Logic can walk with love. It does not need to compete," and smiled at him. Grace said, "We will not go faster than courage can breathe," and the wipers agreed. The city blinked in brief wet mosaics, and then reset. Rain thickened to a sheet, and then eased. The river waited with a stillness that felt rehearsed. They stopped beside a downed line that spat blue fire across wet asphalt. Michael Reed said, "You again," as smoke curled into a torso and turned an unkind head. Dr. Aaron Cole said, "Carbonized vapor with a gust pattern," yet he took one step back. Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Name yourself," and her voice did not flinch. The thing said, "I am the shade that your fear feeds," and sparks danced like teeth. Lena Morales said, "Then it can starve," and lifted a rescue blanket like a banner. Rain hissed as if choosing sides, and then fell neutral. Michael said, "I will not feed you," and felt his lungs open. The shade said, "You left a man last month," and slid toward his shoes. Grace said, "Mercy speaks now," and traced a cross in the wet air. Aaron said, "We clear the area and stabilize," and radioed with steadier hands. The smoke tore itself and collapsed into simple steam. Michael's breath shook, and then settled into time. The night learned his name, and said it kindly. Morning light spilled through the stained glass, dust motes hanging like notes in a held chord. Michael Reed said, "If fear has a name, can it be unnamed?" Pastor Grace Whitfield said, "Not unnamed, but unfed," her hands resting calmly on the pew rail. Dr. Aaron Cole, scrolling his phone for updates, said, "You need therapy, not theology," though his tone lacked bite. Lena Morales laughed softly and said, "Maybe both, one for the mind, one for the soul." The silence after her words was warm, not empty. Michael traced the grain of the pew, feeling it steady him. Grace said, "Peace is not the absence of danger, but the absence of surrender to fear," and Michael let the phrase lodge somewhere deep. Aaron sighed and slid his phone into his pocket. Lena leaned forward, catching Michael's eye as if passing him an invisible weight she believed he could carry. Outside, the streets hummed with the aftermath of the storm. But inside, the air was still enough to hear the timbers breathe. Michael knew the fight would need his whole self, not the half-life he'd been living. The call came mid-morning, a panic at the Riverwalk. Michael's breath stuttered until Grace said, "Walk with me." Aaron said, "I'll keep vitals," swinging his medkit over his shoulder. Lena said, "I'll keep courage," falling into step beside Michael. The river's surface chopped in the breeze, reflecting a pale, uncertain sky. In the shadow beneath the bridge, the shade pooled like an old rumor, shifting without form. Seraphine, unseen to passers-by, hovered above the water, her linen robe untouched by wind. "What you fear withers when faced," she murmured, her voice threading into Michael's chest. He swallowed hard and stepped closer to the rail. Grace said, "Breathe the air, not the memory," her eyes on him, not the water. Aaron knelt to check his kit, pretending not to watch. Lena stayed at his side, hand near but not touching. The shadow stirred, as if aware its days of haunting were numbered. Michael's grip on the rail tightened, not to hold on but to anchor himself for the next step. The teen on the bench gasped like the river had followed him ashore. Michael knelt and said, "Breathe with me," voice low and firm. Aaron crouched opposite, counting, in 2, out 4, steady as a metronome. Lena draped a blanket around the boy's shoulders, her touch careful. Grace stood just behind, murmuring a prayer that braided with the rhythm of breaths. The boy's shoulders began to loosen. "I saw my brother's accident again," he whispered, eyes unfocused. Michael's throat tightened. He knew that particular ghost. "You're here now," he said. A quiet anchor. Aaron checked the boy's pulse without breaking the cadence. Lena met Michael's eyes, reading the silent recognition between them. The boy's breath evened, and the hard edge in the air softened. Grace's prayer faded into the background hum of the river. Michael rose slower than he sat down, as though testing new ground beneath his feet. The shadow under the bridge stilled but did not vanish. It waited. Alone at the rail, Michael said, "Shade, I know you're here." A cold thread curled along his spine. Seraphine appeared at his shoulder, her light bending the air. "The way out is the way through," she said, voice like water over stone. "Through what?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "The lake you locked away," she replied. The river's chop stilled, smoothing into deceptive glass. Michael stared at it, seeing not the city's river but the mirrored surface of Lake Maris on that summer day. Behind him, footsteps approached, but he didn't turn. Seraphine's hand hovered inches from his arm, near enough to feel, not to touch. "You're not bound to the drowning," she said, and the words struck like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward. Michael exhaled, slow and uneven, and closed his eyes. The cold receded a little, but the truth remained, as unyielding as the rail beneath his grip. That night in the fellowship hall, the hum of a coffee pot replaced the river's rush. Lena Morales said, "I used to run with a crew that hurt people, and I carry that like stones." Aaron said, "You changed. Neuroplasticity is real," leaning back in his chair. Grace said, "Grace is realer," her eyes warm. Michael said, "If you could be forgiven, maybe I can be." Laughter from the kitchen drifted in like a chorus from another life. Lena looked down at her hands, turning her rosary ring slowly. "Forgiveness feels heavier than guilt at first," she said, "but it builds you instead of burying you." Aaron sipped coffee, watching the steam curl upward. Grace nodded, folding her hands on the table. Michael sat a little straighter, the thought settling in his bones. Outside, the street lamp light spilled through the window in slow pulses, like the night itself was breathing with them. Sleep dragged Michael Reed into a dream too sharp to be random. The lake lay before him, its surface glassy and impossible under a sky thick with heat. He said, "Emily, I'm sorry," and his 19-year-old self stood barefoot on the dock, frozen. Emily Dove, 17th, her braids slicing the air before the water took her. The shade whispered, "You froze," from beneath the surface. Seraphine's voice threaded through, steady and warm, but love moved. Michael's throat burned with the taste of sun-warmed wood and panic. The child Emily saved was only a blur of limbs breaking the surface, coughing life. The dock swayed under him as the dream rippled. Michael reached forward, but his hands passed through the moment. Emily turned once, smiling as if she knew she was leaving something more than breath behind. The shade's shadow stretched toward him, but Seraphine's light cut across the water, scattering it like ash in wind. He woke with wet cheeks and the divine ache that truth had more to reveal. In Aaron's clinic office, morning light filtered through blinds in neat stripes across the desk. Michael said, "Teach me to fight the panic." Aaron said, "Exposure therapy, steps not leaps, uncapping a blue marker." Grace said, "Steps can become a walk," her voice calm as paper turning. Lena said, "I'll go with you to the water," leaning forward in her chair. Aaron sketched an exposure ladder on the whiteboard, writing each stage in careful block letters. Michael's eyes traced the rungs like they were footholds on a cliff. Grace folded her hands, watching him like a gardener watches new shoots. Lena smiled faintly, as if already seeing the day he'd take the final step. "We'll start with 10 feet away from the shore," Aaron said, capping the marker. "I can do that," Michael replied, the words landing solid. The hum of the clinic clock seemed suddenly like a countdown, not to fear, but to freedom. The first step was simple on paper: stand 10 feet from the river for 10 seconds. Michael said, "I can do this," though his voice was thinner than he wanted. Lena counted softly. Aaron timed, and Grace prayed under her breath. The shade crawled along the underside of a bench like spilled ink, its edges fraying. Michael's eyes stayed on the waterline, refusing to shadow his attention. "Again," he said, when the seconds were up, and the bench shadow thinned, like appetite denied. Aaron noted the vitals were steady. Lena smiled, counting once more. Grace's voice was a steady background hum, like a hymn half remembered. Michael inhaled, longer this time, letting the air fill the spaces fear had claimed. The water reflected the sky in broken pieces, and he wondered if that was the truth of courage, not stillness, but motion held in place. That evening, Grace sat alone beneath the glow of stained glass, her prayer book open, but unread. "Lord," she said softly, "sometimes I wonder if I'm mistaking psychology for providence." Seraphine's voice answered from the aisle, "You were not asked to choose, only to love." Grace's shoulders eased, and she laughed quietly at herself. Then I can, she said, and closed the book. The glass above her scattered the last light of day into blues and golds across the pews. She traced the grain of the wood, feeling the weight of years and prayers layered there. The air smelled of candle wax and dust warmed by the day's sun. Outside, the street was beginning to hum again, but in here, time had thinned to something almost transparent. Grace rose slowly, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to carry the stillness with her. In a twilight vision by the river, Michael saw Seraphine standing just above the water, her reflection brighter than the sky. "The child your sister saved still walks this city," she said. "Where?" Michael asked, pulse quickening. She smiled. "You already know." His mind flashed to Lena's eyes and a fragment of memory from a summer carnival. The face of a little girl coughing lake water, a woman's scream, Emily's braid disappearing into waves. The world around them dimmed, leaving only the river's soft voice. Michael's breath shook, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition settling into him. "It was her," he whispered. Seraphine's smile deepened, and the water rippled once, as if agreeing. Somewhere in the city, Lena was likely laughing, unaware that her life had been the hinge of his own for decades. The knowledge felt like both a gift and a summons. Michael Reed found Lena on a park bench under the late afternoon sun. "Were you ever at Lake Maris when you were 5? He asked, voice careful. She blinked. "My mom told me a girl pulled me from the deep and never came up." Aaron, leaning against the bench, gave a low whistle. "Coincidences happen," Grace said. "So does Providence," her tone leaving no room for doubt. Lena's fingers brushed the edge of her jacket like she was touching an old scar. "I never remembered her face," she said, eyes far away. Michael's breath caught. He could see Emily's braid in the sunlight on Lena's hair. A breeze moved through the trees, shaking loose the hum of traffic. Aaron shifted his weight, but didn't look away. Grace folded her hands, silent now, watching the recognition form between them. Lena glanced up, her gaze locking on Michael as if some piece of her history had just been returned, perfectly whole. "I blamed myself for freezing," Michael said, "but Emily chose to jump." Seraphine's voice drifted over his shoulder. "She chose love." From the hedge, the shade hissed, "You still left a man last month." Michael's jaw tightened. "I will face that too." Grace's expression softened into pride. Aaron frowned, caught between skepticism and the weight of shared guilt. Lena watched him steadily, the wind lifting her hair. The head shivered as if recoiling from something unseen. Seraphine's presence brightened, her eyes steady on Michael's. "Fear thrives on the past," she said. He stepped forward, shadow shrinking behind him. The sound of distant bells carried on the air, thin but clear. Michael exhaled and let the moment stand without filling it with words. The shade's edges bled into the grass, its shape dissolving as if it had lost interest, or strength. Over coffee at a corner table, Aaron said, "The death you blame yourself for last month. I signed off on a risky discharge because I was tired." Michael's brow furrowed. "You thought it was safe?" Aaron shook his head. "I thought I was invincible." Grace, stirring sugar into her cup, said, "We all confess to light." Lena reached across the table, squeezing Aaron's wrist. "Owning it is the only way it changes," she said. Outside, pedestrians moved in easy rhythm, oblivious to the quiet reckoning inside. Michael leaned back, the weight of his own guilt shifting as he recognized the shared burden. Aaron's gaze dropped to the swirl in his coffee, as if he could read his future there. Grace smiled faintly, watching them both, the scent of roast beans and warm bread filling the air. The conversation lingered without urgency, like a song content to stay on one chord. That night, the shade filled the church like low smoke, curling around the altar. "If you step into water, I will take you," it said, voice like cracking ice. Michael stood at the aisle's center. "Then meet me there." Grace's voice cut the air. "We will watch and pray." Aaron, beside her, said, "We will monitor." Lena said, "We will not run." The candles held their flames steady as if they had learned defiance. Seraphine appeared near the font, her light pressing the shadow back a few steps. Michael's chest rose and fell evenly, his feet planted. The shade shifted, unsure, tasting the resolve in the air. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a distant echo of the storm that had started all of this. In the charged stillness, the church felt like a battlefield claimed by peace before the first strike. "Tomorrow at dawn the river will test you," Seraphine said, her light dimmer now as though conserving strength. Michael gave a short laugh. "It already is." She tilted her head. "Tests end when truth begins." Grace rested a hand on his shoulder. Aaron adjusted the med kit straps, more focused than nervous. Lena stood a step behind Michael, silent but steady. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled rinsed clean. Streetlights glowed in small halos across the wet pavement. Michael looked at each of them in turn, feeling the strange certainty that dawn would come no matter what waited at the river. The candles along the wall guttered once, then steadied, their flames like sentinels. "Then we go," he said. The words didn't feel like a choice. They felt like the next step on a path already under his feet. At first light, the river was a sheet of pewter under a sky just beginning to warm. Michael Reed said, "I'll step to the ankle, then calf," his breath visible in the cool air. Aaron Cole checked the rope and said, "Safety first." Lena Morales, standing on Michael's left, said, "You're not alone." Pastor Grace Whitfield added, "Neither is the fear," her voice steady as the current. A faint slick of shadow floated on the surface like oil, the shade waiting. Seraphine's reflection shone brighter than the pale sunrise, her light bending across the ripples. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, and the echo of the city waking behind them. Michael flexed his fingers once, as if readying them for more than water. The others formed a half circle on the bank, the arrangement instinctive. "Let's begin," he said, stepping forward into the day that felt like it had been waiting for this. Michael stepped into the river, cold biting instantly at his skin. "Ankle," he said, voice clipped. The shade curled around his calves like winter smoke. "Calf," he added, the breath catching in his throat. Aaron called, vitals steady, his eyes fixed on the monitor. Lena, leaning forward, said, "I'm here." Grace's voice carried above the water. "Truth walks." Michael laughed once, short and real, the sound surprising him. The water lapped at the rolled hem of his pants. "I want to be more than two." The shadow twisted, seeking entry, but found no purchase. Behind them the horizon glowed warmer, the day growing into itself. Michael turned to face his friends, the first droplets falling from his fingertips back into the current. The air seemed to hold them there, in a moment balanced between the before and after. A jogger stumbled on slick stones upriver, his feet tangling before he slid hard toward the shallows. Michael moved before thought caught up, shouting, "I've got you!" Aaron sprinted with the medkit. Lena caught the jogger's partner as they stumbled toward the bank, and Grace's prayer was sharp, urgent. Michael's hands gripped the man's arm just before the current could pull him under. "Hold on," he said, bracing his legs against the riverbed. The man's eyes were wide, his breath ragged. Behind them, the shade flinched, as if the rescue itself was an act it could not inhabit. Aaron knelt, checking the man's airway while Lena steadied him. The river surged once, and then eased, as though conceding. Michael's own breath thundered in his ears, but he held the man's wrist like an anchor. The rescued jogger coughed, spitting river water onto the stones. "Thank you," he gasped. Michael, still gripping his shoulder, said, "Me too," his voice softer now. The shade retreated, sliding toward the bridge's shadow. "Tonight?" it hissed, the sound thin and frayed. Seraphine appeared just beyond the rail, her light steady. "Then tonight you will end," she said. Michael's eyes followed the retreating darkness, not with fear, but with a readiness that surprised him. Aaron wrapped a thermal blanket around the jogger, his movements brisk but controlled. Lena crouched beside them, offering water. Grace stood at the edge, her hands still, as if the prayer was now complete. The river's surface smoothed once again, as if trying to convince them it had never been angry. At dusk, candles floated on the river as part of a vigil for lost loved ones. Grace spoke to the gathered crowd. Fear names absence. Love names presence. Aaron said quietly to Michael, I didn't know I needed this. Lena said, we all did. Michael held a candle that did not drip, the wax pooling neatly as if even the flame was steady for him. Around them, murmured prayers and soft weeping mingled with the water's hush. The shade lingered beneath the bridge, barely visible, like a rumor about to be disproved. Seraphine stood among the reflections, unseen by the others, her light weaving with the candle glow. Michael closed his eyes briefly, letting the warmth in his hands sink deeper than the cold could reach. The night carried the sound of the river and the soft conviction that tomorrow would come. Night fell hard, clouds pressing low as wind lashed the pier. A shout cut through the storm. Boat over. A small craft near the dock rolled, a child's cry piercing the air. Michael Reed said, I'm going, already stepping forward. Aaron Cole shouted, rope on. Lena Morales tied the line around Michael's waist, her hands quick and sure. I believe you, she said, meeting his eyes. Pastor Grace Whitfield prayed aloud, let perfect love drive out fear. Seraphine stood near the railing, lifting her hand in a gesture that felt like blessing the physics of courage itself. Rain pelted down in cold sheets, turning the dock slick. The water churned black and white, swallowing the reflection of every light on shore. Michael's jaw locked, his chest heaving once before he dove, the rope snaking after him. The wind tore at their coats as the river reached up to meet him. The plunge stole Michael's breath. The shades surged from the depths, swirling around him like a cold whirlpool. Drown with your past, it whispered. Michael said into the dark water, I forgive 19-year-old me. The shadow squeezed tighter. I forgive you, Aaron, he gasped, kicking hard. Emily, I release you. Seraphine's voice rang like a bell through the water. Love chooses again. His strokes cut sharper now, his muscles burning but moving with purpose. The child's pale shape was ahead, a fragile buoy in the chaos. The current shoved at him, but each pull brought him closer. Above, lightning stitched the sky, its white flash refracted in the black water. The shade recoiled as if each stroke unmade it. Michael's lungs screamed, but his heart beat steady. The only sound was the rush of water and the stubborn will to reach the small hand in the dark. Michael's hand closed on the child's arm. Hold on, he said, voice muffled by water. He tied the quick release knot with practiced speed. Above, Aaron and Lena hauled the rope hand over hand, their muscles straining. Grace stood on the pier's edge, timing her prayer to each pull. The shade lunged one last time, screaming without sound, but tore apart like fog on a bright blade. The current shifted from predator to passenger. Michael kicked upward, breaking the surface into cold air and harder rain. The child clung to him, coughing. Almost there, he said, his voice rough but steady. Aaron's voice called from the pier, you're clear. Lena leaned over the edge, arms ready. Grace's words rose over the storm, more command than plea. Come home. On the pier, the child's coughing eased into breathing. The crowd exhaled as one. Michael sagged to his knees, laughing and crying at once. Seraphine touched his shoulder, her hand warm even through soaked fabric. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of love, she said. The shade, now no more than a wisp, whispered, I am hungry. Michael answered, I am not your food. The mist drifted apart, vanishing into the storm. Aaron checked the child's pulse and gave a small nod. Lena wrapped the child in a towel, murmuring reassurances. Grace's face shone with rain and tears, her hands still clasped. Around them, the rain began to soften, its rhythm easing as though the river had finally exhaled. Michael closed his eyes and let the weight lift. Sirens faded as emergency crews packed up. The river lay quiet, its surface dark but calm. Aaron said, "I saw miracles in protocols tonight." Grace replied, "And protocols in miracles." Lena, holding the child now asleep, said, "I was the rescued once. Now I'm the rescuer." Michael said, "I was the fear once. Now I'm the yes." The city lights blinked across the water like low-hanging stars. Seraphine's form grew fainter, her smile lingering. "You will choose again," she said, her voice almost part of the breeze. Michael nodded, the truth settling in his chest without resistance. The group stood together at the pier's edge, not speaking, each listening to the river's new voice. It no longer threatened. It invited. Somewhere upriver, a ripple spread, carrying the night's ending into tomorrow's beginning. Morning broke over Lake Maris like a slow exhale, mist curling from the surface. Michael Reed stood on the old dock, Grace, Aaron, and Lena beside him. "Emily, I remember you rightly now," he said, voice steady. Pastor Grace Whitfield replied, "Memory redeemed is a sacrament." Aaron Cole set his phone down for once, just listening to the bird calls. Lena Morales skipped a stone, the ripple catching the early light like a chain of gold links. Michael's shoes rested on the dock behind him, bare feet pressing into damp wood. The air smelled of cedar and clean water, untainted by memory's bite. The lake's stillness seemed to stretch outward, matching the quiet in his chest. Grace's eyes softened as she watched him stand without the shiver of avoidance. The morning felt less like a scene ending, and more like a door quietly opening. At the dock's edge, Michael held a small folded note, one word in faded ink: "Forgive." His voice carried across the still water. "I forgive myself for freezing, and I forgive the boy who thought hiding was the cure." Seraphine's reflection formed beside his own, her voice a quiet thread. "Peace is the byproduct of truth chosen repeatedly." Michael let the paper fall. It landed softly, the ink bleeding into the ripples before sinking. The sun caught the surface, lighting each ring that spread outward. Grace closed her eyes in prayer. Aaron crossed his arms, no skepticism left in his posture, just thought. Lena exhaled, a slow smile touching her lips. Michael stepped back, but not away. The lake no longer pushed him out. Aaron chuckled, shaking his head. "If I presented that angel at a medical conference, they'd pull my license." Grace laughed. "You can present humility instead." Lena grinned. "Humility keeps licenses better than pride," Michael said, "and saves children." The air was lighter now, the humor easy, without strain. The dock creaked under shifting feet, gulls wheeled overhead. Aaron took a long drink from a thermos, offering it without looking, and Michael accepted. Grace leaned on the rail, watching the ripple lines fade into stillness. Lena crouched to trail her fingers in the water, her smile both present and remembering. They stayed like that for a while, conversation drifting like the lake's surface. Nothing urgent, everything steady. That evening, candles glowed in the church. Grace's voice rang clear. "Tonight, we baptize not into fear, but into courage." Michael stepped into the font's water without a tremor. "I am not afraid of the road to peace," he said. Aaron's eyes softened, whispering, "I needed this more than I knew." Lena laughed through tears, clasping her hands. The water ran cool down Michael's hair, but it felt like light. The congregation watched in silence, sensing more than ceremony. Grace's hands were steady, her eyes on his, as she spoke the blessing. Michael stepped out, barefoot on stone, the drip of water sounding like a quiet applause. Alone on the church steps at violet dusk, Michael looked out at the city's slow evening pulse. "Thank you, Emily," he said softly. "Thank you, love." Seraphine's voice drifted on the breeze. "You will fear again, and you will choose again." He smiled, the truth neither heavy nor light, just his. Folding his empty coat pockets, he descended the steps without hurry. Street lamps flickered on, their halos soft in the cooling air. The street ahead was unremarkable, an ambulance turning the corner, a couple laughing, a bus sighing to a stop. Michael walked into it all, the quiet at the center of the storm now part of his stride.